Let's talk about the psychological contract. The psychological contract is really a very simple concept, although it sounds quite difficult. It's quite simple. The contract really is this. It really means that basically psychological meaning it's in your mind, contract meaning it's between more than one person, two or more people. So this is a contract that people have in their mind. In other words, it's about the expectations that people have about each other. And in an organisation, it's about the individual's expectations of the organisation. And likewise, it's about the organisation's expectations of the individual. So if you have a look over here, the individual has certain expectations of what they can offer an organisation. And as a result of that, they expect certain things in return from the organisation. And these things aren't necessarily written down, but actually what happens is that they are they're expectations that people have in their mind. Equally, employees have expectations of an organisation, or sorry, I should say it the other way. Organisations have expectations of the individual, and they also have expectations around what they can offer the individual in return for that. So this becomes a contract, if you like, and this contract can be very powerful, and it can actually create a very strong bond, if you like, in an organisation. It can work for or it can work against an organisation. So when people talk to me about the psychological contract, and when people talk to me about what is it all about, what is culture all about, it's really, in essence, about the manager and the employee. It's about the employment relationship, or as I've called it, the psychological contract. So if we can get good relationships happening between managers or leaders and team members or employees, we are a long, long way towards creating an employer of choice. So that's at the heart of the matter. So how do we actually create a psychological contract that both the organisation and the individual can buy into? So basically, both parties are getting something useful out of it. Okay, so I have identified 8 values that I think are absolutely critically important in this new or changing psychological contract. And I just want to run through those with you so that you can see the changes that are occurring. And these changes have only occurred in the last 30 years. But just to give you some indicators as to how these things are changing. The old contract was about specialised employment. So this is about finding a niche somewhere, specialising in an area and becoming good at it as a means of insulating yourself from your competitors. Now, organisations would do this and individual employees would do this as well. But the problem is the world is moving so fast, we don't know what these specialised areas are in the future. So really the new value is flexible deployment. That is the capacity to take your skills and your competencies and to use them in a variety of different contexts. That becomes the critical indicator in the good. It sounds like the audio is great. Thank you, and I apologise for that. So, what's the second value? The second value is internal focus. There was an obsession in the 20th century on quality assurance. There still is. And the argument or the assumption around quality assurance is if we get everything right internally, then what will come out at the other end is quality. In other words, if we get all our processes right, people should get the right product service at the end. And to a large extent that's true, and I guess you could look at the McDonald's Corporation, and they very much popularised that concept that basically everything is documented, everything has a process, and basically the end result is the burger tastes the same whether you're in Budapest or Sydney. So what in fact is the new value? The new value is customer focus. Now, I'm not suggesting the things on the left-hand side disappear, but the new value is around everything we say, think and do should have the end user in mind. Now, the trouble with quality assurance, or internal focus as I prefer to call it, is that we get so obsessed with our processes and our systems that we actually forget that at the end there's somebody purchasing or using our services or goods. So a customer focus has to be a new approach that is critical in this agile working environment we're in. Now the focus is on the job, and we have job descriptions and we have job specifications. People are recruited and selected on the basis of a job specification, and of course this is still very prevalent in our working environment. But the problem with a job description is the focus becomes the job. And you might say, well, what's the problem with that? Well, you can be doing your job really well, but not performance oriented. So in other words, the focus really needs to be on performance. And a lot of performance actually occurs outside the job description. I wonder if anyone has thought about that. So things that people do internally, for example, the way they talk to other people, the way they contribute to a team, the way they develop their skill set, all of those things that aren't necessarily documented and with KPIs in the job description are critical to performance. So we need to move away from job descriptions and move towards a performance orientation, and I'll explain how we do that shortly. Functional based work, people working in silos, and you know, I know we've got some public sector people in the presentation today, and you know, I'm sure you would agree with me that the public sector is very heavily functionally based. One silo won't necessarily talk to another, so it's not necessarily terribly healthy. So really what we've got to try and do is move towards project-based work, and that's a value around looking at things as a project. Because at the end of the day, everything that occurs in an organisation fundamentally is a project, and it usually crosses several different boundaries, and we need to start thinking about work as projects rather than functions. The next value is human to spirit in work, and basically if we just pay people enough, give them enough extrinsic motivation, that should be enough. Any job's a good job is the old thinking. Well, actually, a whole movement around engagement is about how do we get people to bring their hearts and minds to work with them and not disengage the moment they get to the door. That's the challenge that we've got for organisations in the 21st century. We want people to actually be engaged. Easier said than done, but there are some things that can be done in order for that to occur. Now, the old concept of loyalty, I've worked in this organisation for 20 years. Well, that's pretty much old hat, and I'm not suggesting people haven't worked in a place for 20 years, but the thing is, it's not how long you've been working somewhere that's important. The question then is, what have you done while you've been there? So the new value, I think, is around commitment. We actually want committed work. We want a committed workforce, and commitment doesn't mean the same thing as loyalty. You can be very loyal to your employer, but not particularly committed. Equally, you can be very committed to an employer, but not necessarily very loyal. It'd be nice if we had both, but often if we had to have a choice, I think the choice is about a committed employee who may only stay there for a short period of time, but while they're there, they've done some very good things. And you'll find that the employees that you're trying to attract to your organisation are more likely to be committed than loyal. Training is the old concept of technical training done in a classroom. A lot of training, of course, is done on the job. It's often done in coaching environments, showing people how to do things. We need to move towards a learning and development culture rather than a training culture. And there is a big difference. Training is a subset of learning and development, but learning and development is a much bigger concept. And we need to move towards that. The majority of training done in organisations is technically based, and understandably 80% of it is technically based. That's fine, but we need to also broaden that to include other forms of training and development. Closed information is usually the concept of, if you don't hear from me, then everything's fine. Have you heard managers say that? And the other thing that I often hear managers say is, if no news is good news, or you'll get told on a need-to-know basis. All of these cliches are very real in organisations. What we've actually got to do is open up information channels and give people an opportunity to actually understand the perspective of the CEO. Now, if somebody, you know, at the coalface understands the perspective of the CEO because they have extensive information at their fingertips, then they're likely to think like a CEO, in which case the organisation is going to be better off, including the employee. So open information is the key. So what we need to do is to look towards developing a culture that's reflective of the 8 values on the right-hand side, and understand that the 8 values on the left-hand side are actually old hat and are actually holding us back. And the interesting thing is, if you're trying to attract good employees, those employees have already embraced the new values on the right-hand side and discarded the old values on the left-hand side. So we've got to create a culture around these 8 values, and that's the challenge for us. I mentioned before speed was critically important in organisations, and I think I'll just share with you a little model that I think you might find interesting, that when we think about speed, what are we actually talking about? There's 3 types of speed. There's speed to market, and what I mean by that is to get the product or the service out into the marketplace faster than a competitor. Now, obviously, in a private sector organisation, market speed is critically important. If you think about touchscreen technology, which of course is now commonplace, wasn't once. And when the Apple phones originated with touchscreen technology, Apple's revenue went through the roof because they had first advantage. They were first to market with touchscreen technology. So getting our product to market is critically important. There's another type of speed that's critically important, and this is important in the public sector and private sector, and that is processing speed. How quickly can we get our processes done internally so that the end user is satisfied? So we don't tolerate organisations that take forever to get things done for us anymore. We probably never did, but you know, we certainly don't anymore. And so the question then is, how can we get things done faster with the same quality? So how can we do that? That's processing speed, and that's really important in any organisation. Now, the third form of speed is one that I call recovery speed. Now, recovery speed simply means this. When a mistake is made, and let's face it, all of us make mistakes, all organisations make mistakes, we can minimise mistakes, but we can't actually get rid of them. So the question then is, when a mistake is made, how quickly can we recover? That's what recovery speed's all about. In other words, if a customer's been overcharged, how quickly can we rectify the situation? Or if a customer's got the wrong product, how quickly can we rectify the situation and basically substitute the product that they need? Most customers are pretty tolerant when mistakes are made if they know their mistake is going to be fixed quickly and with priority. So recovery speed has to be a critically important aspect of the 21st century organisation. Okay, now let's get into some very practical strategic things that you can do to actually create a culture which is more reflective of what was on the right-hand side, those 8 values that I shared with you earlier. So let's have a look at the value of flexible deployment, which is the first value that I went through. Now, flexible deployment means that you have got people who are basically multi-skilled. These are people that can do a number of different tasks effectively, so that your organization is obviously more agile and the employee themselves is obviously more multi-skilled, which means that they're more employable. So everybody's actually benefiting. Now, some of you may use this and some of you may be familiar with it, but I can assure you, if it's new to you, it's worth giving this a go. It is highly effective, and it's simply called a skills matrix. You'll notice there this is just a simple example from my book, you'll notice on the left-hand side you've got a number of people in a team, and then you'll notice on the right-hand side you've got a lot of numbers across the top, and those numbers are reflective of competencies in a team. So basically we've decided that there are 9 things that everybody in this team ought to be able to do. So if this could be a road crew, or it could be a group of employees in administration, it could be some marketing executives, whatever. And these are the 9 things that they're expected to do. Now, what we've done is we've populated those 9 things with a number of different colors. I mean, you can use any system you want, of course. And let's just go through them. If there's a white space there, it means that person has not been exposed to any coaching on that particular skill. They are completely novices at doing whatever it is, and that's been reflected in the matrix. The light grey area means that they are actually undergoing training. So they're not yet competent, but they're certainly on the way, and they're certainly starting to master the skills needed. The darker grey means that they're competent, but basically means that they can do that job on their own without any supervision at a minimum acceptable standard of performance. And the black means that not only can that person do that skill, they also have the capacity to be able to coach and train other people to do that skill as well. So this is actually a map of the team and a map of their skills and competencies. And what you'll notice is that, if you look at that at a quick glance, you'll notice, of course, that it would be very easy for you to be the team leader to actually walk up to, perhaps you could walk up to Joe next week and say, Joe, could you possibly get Bill, Harry, Sue and Kathy up to speed on competency 2 next week, or at least start the training? So that would be easy. And then of course you could walk up to Bill, Harry, Sue and Kathy and say, could you guys make sure you meet with Joe sometime next week and get started on learning how to do whatever it is that you need to do. So it's a great way of being able to look at priorities around learning. It's a great way to actually create a multi-tasked or multi-skilled team. So you set yourself a task that by the end of the year that particular matrix will be completely dark grey by the end of the year. And so therefore everybody will be multi-skilled in that area. And then you can start branching out across functions. So it's a simple process. I can assure you it works extremely well. I've used this in white-collar, blue-collar environments to great effect. So that's a very simple way of getting underway with flexible deployment. Not difficult to do. So let's talk about the value of performance focus. Remember I said that there was a focus on the job, and that has to be replaced by a focus on performance. And people can be doing their job, following their key performance areas in their job description, and still not achieving much. That's a fact. That's the way things work. So we want to stop that culture and create a situation where people are actually performing. So how do we do that? Well, we move from a job description to a role description, and it's not a play on words. A role description implies that a person has more than one role. A job description is one of the roles that people perform in an organisation. But I've identified 4 others, and those 4 are positive mental attitude and enthusiasm role, a team role, a career role, and an innovation and continuous improvement role. And what we're trying to do in a role description is to encapsulate 5 roles that employees are expected to play, and 1 job role and 4 non-job roles. And you can imagine an organisation where we elevate these non-job roles to a higher status, how effective they would be. We would all we're all familiar with people who have got excellent technical skills, but they're a pain in the you-know-what to deal with. And those people often get away with a lot. And people will rationalise, well, they're getting their job done, even though they're annoying everybody around them. I would argue that they're not performing, and they're not performing because they're actually sabotaging the work of other people, even though they might be doing their own technical work very well. So moving towards role descriptions, and I have a little bit to say about how to do that in my book. Now, if you look at the traditional, let's talk about the project-based work. Now, the old value was functional-based work. Now, project-based work, whenever I go to an organisation, I'll often ask for an organisational chart, and this is what I get. And I've yet to see any chart that's constructed differently. But, you know, you've got the CEO at the top and you've got your silos, and that's how the whole thing operates, and you've got a few dotted lines here and there and so forth. Now, the problem with this is, of course, it creates a silo mentality, and we're all familiar with that. It means that the salespeople don't talk to the administrative people, and the administrative people don't talk to the operational people, and it means that communication is stifled cross-functionally. It can be a real problem. So, and of course, we've been tinkering with matrix-style models and all sorts of things, product-style models. I would argue that perhaps we should rethink this whole concept of how we organise our organisation. Here's some food for thought. It's only a very simple model, and why don't you get a pen and paper out and start to redesign your organisation along the lines that I've got here, which I think I call in my latest book, which is out later this year, a customer-centric model. But basically, we have a series of concentric circles. The departments are still there. We've actually created a different type of organisational chart. But what's important in this chart is that we've embedded into the organisation a series of project-based teams. And these project-based teams are cross-functional. So we'd have one person from the engineering department, one person from marketing, one person from sales and customer service. And what these people do is they work on organisational challenges that need to be resolved. So one of those challenges might be the rewards and remuneration packages. It might be workplace culture. It could be improving the quality of service to the customer. Whatever it might be, why not get a project-based team to work on that project and make it a project? And what you do is, whenever I've done this, and whenever I've got people, a slice of the organisation together, it works brilliantly because these people bring different perspectives to the table, and it can be very powerful. So we've still got our departments, but we're doing it in a way, and you'll notice in the managerial space there are no spokes, because the argument is, if you're a manager, you wear two hats. One is your functional hat, which of course is your departmental hat, and most managers wear that very capably and obsessively. But there is another hat, and that is your managerial or strategic hat. In other words, thinking about the good of the organisation overall. So we need to create that culture where top management is thinking beyond their simple silo. So you might want to tinker with that and play with that. There's more information in the book about that I would refer you to. So look, talking about learning and development, I mentioned before that the old concept was a value of training, which is very much technically focused. Here's a challenge. In your organisations, think about what expenditure what you spend on these three categories. So you could chop up learning and development into three categories. You've got technical centered learning, and technical centered learning is really learning, how to do a job, or they're basically job skills. And as I said earlier, 80% of expenditure usually goes on technical based training. And one of the reasons for that is quite simple. that when people finish, they can apply that skill immediately to their job. So you can actually see tangibly whether you've got a return on investment. But there is two other types of training that are quite critical and often neglected. One of those is the person-centered approach. The person-centered approach is euphemistically called personal development. It's been around for 25 years, and teaching people how to develop themselves. The argument there, of course, is if people can develop themselves, they will make better employees. So teaching people communication skills, for example, helps them as individuals. Hopefully, if they're in a sales role, it might lead to more sales. So personal-centered training is pretty much accepted out there in the world of work now, but there's a less tenuous link between the learning and the actual success of the learning. It's not that obvious. You've got problem-centered, and that's probably one of the reasons it's not as popular. Problem-centered approach is one that's sadly neglected, and this is about teaching people how to solve day-to-day dilemmas that are not in the procedures manual. And by doing that, you're actually creating an excellent opportunity for people to start to think for themselves and to use their initiative. Now, you don't need to send people off to expensive training programs to do this. You can simply use part of your team meeting to discuss a situation that occurred recently and to brainstorm some ways that perhaps this whole scenario could have been improved. And it's not a finger-pointing exercise. It's really an opportunity to consider, I guess you could call it a debrief or an after-action review, to consider ways to actually improve that process and agree on that. There's just not enough of that happening, and one of the reasons is that we're too busy getting on to the next big thing. We're all time poor, and of course we don't learn anything from our mistakes, and that's a real issue as far as developing the organisation is concerned. And you know, a meeting of 15 minutes around a situation that occurred with your team can be enormously valuable if there are some lessons learned and there's a commitment to apply those in future. That obviously is highly beneficial in terms of learning. So my challenge to you is go and have a look at your training and development budget and have a think what percentage is technical centered, what percentage is personal centered, and what percentage is problem centered. And actually have a look and see. I would suggest to you that if you really want to develop this value of learning and development, you should try to go 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 if possible. So yeah, that means really beefing up the problem-centered learning and the personal development or person-centered approach. By doing that, you'll be far more effective. Now let's talk about one more value, and I haven't covered them all, but I've covered a fair few. Here's another practical idea that might be of use to you. When it's not me, in fact, a fellow by the name of Campbell called this the initiative paradox, and I love it because basically he's saying that all workplaces have problems with this initiative paradox. What's an initiative paradox? Well, initiative paradox is you want, if we're a manager, we want our employees to show initiative. Absolutely, there's no doubt. We also, employees on the other end, want to be able to show initiative. So there's a paradox. We both want the same thing, but for some reason, initiative doesn't take place. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So let me just draw this out for you so you can see how it works. You've got a manager and you've got an employee. The manager wants the employee to show more initiative. So the manager might mention at a team meeting that he wants people to use their brains, he wants them to think outside the box, he or she wants them to show their own initiative, and he or she will back them. So that's the rhetoric. The employee, on the other hand, also wants to think for themselves. So the employee does not want to be micromanaged, no one does. They want to be given the opportunity to be able to exercise their own autonomy and enterprise and initiative. So both are on the same page. However, when the manager mentions to the employee that they want them to show initiative, the employee is not 100% convinced of that. In fact, they've only heard them say that once in the last 6 months. So they think it's just a bit of rhetoric. So they don't. So what happens is the employee doesn't show any initiative because they don't think the manager really is genuine about that. And so what happens is the manager says, okay, there's no initiative being shown. There's a vacuum there that needs filling. It looks as if my employees don't want to show initiative. I'll jump in and make the decision. So it's like a dog chasing its own tail. This happens every day in every organisation. We have this paradox occurring where the employee doesn't believe the manager, so they don't do anything, and the manager jumps in and does something. And of course, what happens is the employee thinks to themselves, aha, I'll just follow my manager's direction because clearly he or she did not want me to show initiative. Because if they did, they wouldn't have just jumped in at this last minute and done what they have done. They would have allowed me the opportunity to show my initiative. So you see, it's a significant paradox. So really the answer to that, and I don't have enough time to go into great detail today, but the answer is very much for the manager to communicate with the employee about the types of situations where initiative is completely open, and to communicate as well to the employees when initiative is not to be shown under any circumstances, such as a health and safety issue. You know, we need to follow that by the book. And where there's a problem is in the grey area of where we don't know whether we should be showing initiative or whether we should be following the system. The manager should have conversations with his or her team about those grey areas and what can be done about it. So that becomes really important to break or overcome the initiative paradox that I've just mentioned before. So there's some very practical tools that you might take away with you, and people often say, well, you know, where do I start? Well, just start with one value, and what will happen is that by starting with one value, you will actually change the value or the values in other areas as well. Now, let's have a look at, I guess, the next step is how you might actually go about changing your culture. So what do you have to actually do? Where do you start? I think the very first thing that you should do is actually evaluate your culture. So the very first thing is get a handle on where your organisation is in relation to the 8 values that I shared with you earlier on. So how closely aligned are you to these values? So in order to get that information, there's a cycle that I suggest you go through. The first step in this process is to define your workplace sample. Now, I would suggest that everybody in your organisation should be part of this sample. Obviously, the larger the sample, the more valid the responses. So I'd be giving everyone an opportunity to contribute to this survey. This survey is done online, or it can also be done paper and pencil if need be. And the survey is based on 80 statements, 10 of which relate to each of the 8 values. So it only takes 10-15 minutes to complete online. It's not a huge imposition. And people have an opportunity to agree, to disagree, or to neither agree nor disagree, and they can also make their comments as well. So the first thing is to define the sample. The second thing is to administer the survey, and what that means basically is, as I said, it's done online. It's very simple. It's done and dusted, and the statements are crafted around the eight values I went through before. And then that produces a report, and the report is a benchmark or a series of benchmarks, if you like, and those benchmarks are basically a snapshot in time of this organisation and how it relates to those 8 values that I mentioned earlier on. So it can be a very useful document from that point of view. Step 4 in the process is to create a project team, and what I suggest there is you get a team of people together that's a replica of the organisation. So this can sometimes be fairly challenging, but basically you want to have an organisation or a project team that's not top heavy, because the reality is there are less managers than employees in any organisation. So you actually want more employees in this project team than managers. And you want to make sure that all your departments are being recognised, and you want, so it might take a little bit of time to get this right, but let me assure you, once you get this project team right, it has a power of its own, because people recognise that it has a huge opportunity to represent the organisation's views in a small room. So we're probably talking, 10 to 15 would be maximum, I'd suggest, 10 to 15 people who would form the project team. Now, you want people there not with their arms folded and their eyes crossed. You want them to be there because they want to be there. So, of course, that's important. Now, usually what happens then is, certainly if I'm working with that project team, I give them some development as a team. So we try and galvanise them as a team, explain what their charter is, do a little bit of team building, talk about what's expected of them and so forth. So that's very, very important, because it's it is a new team that's come together. So it needs a little bit of maintenance in order to ensure that it optimises its capacity. Then what happens is we give the team an opportunity to survey the results that we had in step 3. So they go through those results, and essentially they answer 3 questions. Question 1 is, can you give an example, a real life example of why the results are the way they are? 2, can you think of ways or strategies in order to improve this culture to be more reflective of the value? So obviously we give them some training around what those values actually entail. And 3, what would be the next step in terms of the process of putting a plan of action together? So once we've done all that, the team decides how they're going to communicate so they're essentially creating a second report out of the survey results. They're essentially creating an action plan about what to do around the organisation, and a lot of those things I went through before will come out in the action plan. And then they probably will, what they often do, and from my experience working with organisations, they'll often do a presentation to the senior team. And the senior team, so this is what we call a bottom-up rather than a top-down change approach. The senior team won't take everything on board, and nor should they, but the project team don't expect that they will take on everything as well. But there will be some strategies that they probably can enact immediately, and they will, and that creates some strategies and some buy-in. And then what you get is a situation where in 12 months' time you go through the survey again, exactly the same questions to exactly the same people in exactly the same way, and you ask the same questions, and what you can do is get a benchmark, a before and after snapshot of the organisation in terms of whether it's changed collectively around a number of different initiatives that have occurred in order to change the culture to be more reflective of the 8 values that I went through before. And let's not forget, the reason we're moving towards those 8 values is because that is the culture that's going to attract top performers, and it's the culture that will keep top performers, and that's why we're putting the energy into that. Okay, just quickly before we finish up, and I'm conscious of time, and there may be, if you've got some questions, please type them into the question bar there, and I will get to those very shortly. So here's a real live organisation. I won't explain the methodology too much, other than to say you can notice that there's the 8 values there, and this is a very quick illustration of 3 perspectives. The red bar, or the red circle, is the top management perspective. The yellow is the middle management perspective, and the blue is the team perspective. So what we're actually looking for is an integration with lots of plus signs being positive. So basically an overlapping of the three circles suggests that this organisation is actually achieving a lot of the attributes of that particular value. So you'll notice over here in flexible deployment, that's certainly the case. And certainly it's the case in human spirit and work. There's probably some work to do around performance focus. So that information is expressed in different ways. So this is done in the histogram format. Red's very negative, blue's positive, A stands for agree, D stands for disagree, P is for polarized, meaning strong view one way and a strong view the other. So you can see there at a snapshot where the organisation is in relation to the collective of those 8 values. We can drill all that down further, and you've got 2 statements here from an anonymous organisation that I did this with, and you'll notice Q36. Let me just run through that and show you. My staff are very clear about when and where they should follow organisational policies and procedures. So this has got to do with open information. We want people to follow processes, but we also want people to show initiative. So if you notice there, top management, and in this case there were 6 in the senior team, 4 out of the 6 agreed with that statement, 2 didn't, and then middle management weren't quite, 59 out of 82 agreed, 13 disagreed, and workforce. So that's a pretty good result. And then what you've got over here is a breakdown of the departments as well. So you've got information there that can be useful to have a look at departmentally. So let's have a look at the next one. I have rewarded staff for customer service. So this is about customer focus. Now this result isn't quite so positive. Top management is completely polarized. 2 say yes I have, 2 say no I haven't, 1's not sure. Middle management is more positive, but workforce is polarized. 34, 25, 41, not a good result. So clearly it's very patchy. So you can imagine if the project team was looking at that, they could come up with some recommendations around how there could be a consistent emphasis on rewarding staff across the organisation for showing customer service. So that gives you a bit of an idea as to how it works. Okay, just 2 quick plugs before I take questions. I've got a number of webinars coming up. They're all free. All you have to do is go to my website and you can simply enroll as you did today. So just to let you know, there's a whole bunch of them, 1 a month, and they're there. So you can just go online and register for those free of charge. I did mention before that I give a discount on my book. If you wish to purchase my book, you've got 20% discount. If you send me an email by the close of, midnight tonight, for some of you that's not far away I suppose, if you send me an email, I will send you a key where you can go into my website and you can purchase the book for $28, not $35, plus postage. So, and I'll sign it for you. So there's an offer. So now let's go to questions, because there's probably a number of questions here that people would like to ask. Yes, I've got a question here from Jerry. What do you do after benchmarking the organisation? Well, Jerry, I think, as I said with the cycle, what happens then is the project team actually decides to make recommendations about what needs to happen as a result of those survey results, and that report is compiled, and once that's been compiled, it normally needs to be discussed at a senior management level, or a team meeting, and the senior management team will decide on priorities and what needs to be done. So it becomes an exercise from bottom up type of approach than top down. So in that sense, it's very and I find it works really well from the point of view of what I do with teams as well. So that's how to go about that. Another question here is from Jill. what happens to employees who embrace the new contract but managers don't? Yeah, this is very common. What you'll find if you look at your organisation is that some managers harbour the old psychological contract, and the people that they lead are actually basically believing in the new set of values, and that creates conflict. That creates real problems for an organisation. For example, Mary might be working with Jenny. Jenny's a very traditional manager that believes that managers are there to be making decisions. She doesn't necessarily believe in collaborative leadership. She thinks that it's all about making decisive decisions. However, Mary, on the other hand, who embraces the new psychological contract, believes that decisions should be open and discussed and more collaborative. She is obviously going to be upset because she has a different contract to Jenny, and so therefore there's going to be some conflict in the workplace. Workplaces are filled with these contradictions, and a whole industry about how to deal with Generation X and Y has been developed, when in actual fact all that's really happened is that there is a clash of values in the workplace, and these values, of course, are psychological. We don't talk about them. So what happens is that we just make assumptions about people. So it's really about getting everybody on the same page. It was a good question you asked, and it does. And of course, it works the other way too. The manager can be very enlightened and be dealing with a number of people that want to just be told what to do. They want they're a bit of a them and us, and that in itself can create a problem as well in the reverse. So we're trying to get, but the point about all this is the title of this presentation is Attracting and Retaining Talent. So really what we're trying to do is attract and retain talent. Now, the talent that I'm talking about are the ones who do embrace those 8 values on the right-hand side. So we're trying to keep them. And you can be assured that a talented person will embrace those 8 values. It should be fairly obvious when you look at what they try and achieve. Okay, I think that's about it. Okay, whoops, I've got one question here that I didn't answer. Let me see, it's quite long. The initiative paradox hindered by the manager's perspective that their employees are potential threats or could be due to limited employee development, as they don't want to lose the employee or train new team members. Yeah, look, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons why this is a problem. But a lot of managers just don't want to let go either. They just find it really hard to let go. Other people want to be in complete control. The bottom line is the employee. I often hear this a lot. People say, "Oh yes, but my employees aren't ready to show initiative. They're not skilled up enough." Well, they never will be unless you let go a little bit. I mean, in other words, you've got to start training them, and you've got to start giving them initiative and opportunities to show their wear, because they'll never get to a point where they're comfortable doing something where they need to be enterprising. So there's a whole lot of complexity around that model I showed you. So thanks for bringing that up. But the truth of the matter is, it's one of the things that holds businesses back significantly is the initiative paradox that I went through. So thanks for that question. I realise time has beaten us, so thank you everybody very much for your attention. I apologise again for the problems with the audio at the beginning, and thank you for hanging in there. I'll be sending you out a copy of the slides very soon, and I'll also send you out a recording of this presentation as well. So, and as I say, the book offer is open until midnight tonight. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing your name in one of the other broadcasts that I have later this year. Thank you.